tongue. Everyone a mother's son. Women's fate is lost and won. Behind that heavy door, the justices preside in noble ease.
So anyway, it's good to see everyone, and thanks for joining our Zoom meeting tonight. Today, we're fortunate to have our guest speaker, Ila Rothschild, who many of you have spoken to already. She's a health attorney, and Ila's impressive academic and career accomplishments started when she graduated with honors from the University of Wisconsin at Madison with a bachelor's degree in psychology. And next, she received a master's of social work from the University of Chicago. With both degrees under her belt, can you hear me? Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay. In Ila's second life, with both degrees under her belt, Ila started her career as a social worker at Michael Reese Hospital in Chicago in the 1970s, where she did abortion counseling. In Ila's second life, she received a law degree from the Chicago-Kent College of Law and now specializes in health law. In the 1990s, she worked on some very important cases related to aid and dying. And now we're fortunate to have her with us tonight as she will share the history and her experience as an abortion counselor helping women in the 1970s. Please welcome Ila.
Well, it's wonderful to be here and talk to you. It's interesting. I've always thought that I wanted to speak to a group about my experiences, and I never knew when that would happen. So it's sort of interesting that it's finally happening today. I was always interested in healthcare as a young girl. So whatever I did in terms of school, I was always interested in healthcare. So I was a psych major, Wisconsin. At University of Chicago, I was fortunate to take a course. Probably it might have had to do with being a social worker in a hospital, but fortunately, my professor happened to be the director of social work at Michael Reese Hospital. So that's literally the easiest way. That's how I got my first job. I was originally hired to do abortion counseling at Michael Reese. So we're talking about June of 1974. Roe V. Wade had come down in 1973. Let me just give you a perspective. Not only did I do abortion counseling, which was a good portion of my time, but I did other things in OB-GYN. I worked with women who had stillbirths. I worked with women who delivered and were substance abusers, and we were trying to get them into a substance abuse program. I also I worked in pediatric renal, so we had kids who were being dialyzed at Michael Reese Hospital and then were transplanted at the University of Chicago. So, and we also had a summer camp for the kids. We took them up to Camp Shy. It was an amazing experience. And then I also worked in our intensive care unit at Michael Reese. And I probably, at that time, I was probably now that I think about it, maybe one of the first social workers in Chicago who actually worked in an intensive care unit and rounded every day with the physicians and nurses in the intensive care unit. So Michael Reese probably started its program, it must have been very shortly after Roe v. Wade came down. And I've talked to a girlfriend of mine who was working at Reese and also worked in the unit at the time. It was called the Pregnancy Termination Unit, or PTU. We took approximately 8 to 10 women a day, 5 days a week. We would meet the women usually at about 10 in the morning downstairs. We would bring them up to a room that was on a gynae floor. It was not on an obstetrical floor. We had a dedicated nurse who worked with all the women and worked with us. We had like 8 to 10 reclining chairs in a room. And we would first meet with the women and kind of talk a little bit about why they were there. You know, and a lot of them had pretty incredible stories, but the bottom line being that they had a pregnancy that they needed to terminate for whatever reason. And then they would be examined by a physician. The physicians who performed the procedures were only attendings. We had no residents. So these were our best attending physicians that many of us worked with at Michael Reese at the time. And then like about 1 o'clock or so, the women, we would all go into a waiting room in an outpatient surgery room, and the physician would do the procedure one at a time with the women. Now we were there, the social workers, we gowned up and we went into the OR with the women. So we were there with them, we talked to them, we held their hands, they squeezed our hands. And it was usually the procedure was anywhere from about 20 minutes to 30 minutes. The women then went back to the floor, went back to their reclining chairs. Their blood pressure was taken. They were given a sandwich. They were given something to eat. And then I went back to the room, and then we further discussed what they had been through, any of their concerns, and we also talked about birth control. Some of the women we had seen through the years had come through the PTU more than once, and we were concerned about that. As much as we're very much in favor of women being able to obtain abortions, we were concerned that they were using abortions as birth controls, and we certainly didn't want that. So the other hiccup with respect to providing services at Michael Reese came in 1976. That's when the Hyde Amendment came down. And the Hyde Amendment banned the use of federal funding for abortions through Medicaid. So imagine that there were many women who had even a tougher time obtaining abortions or being able to pay for them. Now, I did a little bit of research. Before the Hyde Amendments, approximately 300,000 abortions were performed annually using taxpayer funding. And again, Michael Reese, we worked 5 days a week, and took anywhere from 8 to 10 women. We also did second trimester abortions, and that was usually because women had medical reasons. We would meet with them and work with them. Obviously, it was a more traumatic experience for them. But, and we also brought in volunteers. After a while, we had other responsibilities we needed to do. I was able to ask my mother, who had been a social worker in her early life, if she would like to be one of our volunteers, and she readily accepted. She also gowned up with the women, and she would go into the OR with the women, which to this day pretty much amazes me. She lived on the north side of Chicago. It just amazes me that she drove all the way down to Michael Reese and helped these women and talked to them. And the women got a kick out of the fact when they found out that we were mother and daughter. But it was an amazing experience. Michael Reese was sort of an amazing hospital. It was originally built, and a lot of immigrants went to Michael Reese. And then further on, Michael Reese was serving a lot of people who lived on the south side. So we saw a variety of women from all sorts of economic and ethnic backgrounds. It was not only an experience for them, but clearly an experience for us. The other interesting thing is, before Roe v. Wade had come down, I'm sure maybe you women heard of the Jane Project. and that was underground, where women were able to obtain abortions. At that time, it was illegal, but some women were able to get abortions through Jane, or I would bet they might have gone abroad and gotten abortions there. If you remember thalidomide, I remember when I was young, I remember seeing the cover of either Life or Look magazine, and it had a picture of a thalidomide child. And I remember the article talked about what the women had gone through, why these children looked the way they did, but that some women who had taken thalidomide were also able to obtain abortions when they realized that the child might be deformed. So that's sort of in a nutshell, tells you what I did at Michael Reese. The women were extremely grateful. I still have a couple of the notes and letters that they wrote to me. And I asked a friend of mine, this was interesting, I have a friend who was a physician there, and I asked her if she knew about the PTU, and she said she had never heard about it except from me. So it was a secret, I guess, within the hospital, although I assumed that all the OB-GYN people were well aware that we had a PTU. But I don't know if other physicians did, or probably heard about it through their friends and perhaps through the social work department at Michael Reese. We got referrals from all over. My girlfriend who obtained an abortion at Michael Reese was originally sent through Planned Parenthood. So I've been trying to think, and maybe you women might have more information. I don't know if there were other hospitals in the Chicago had pregnancy termination units. So I'd be interested in knowing that. But we were just an amazing institution that provided those services to women. Do you guys have any questions or comments? I don't hear you. You'll have to unmute.
Hi, this is Diane.
Hi.
Hi. I guess my real question would be, nowadays there is such a protest against these clinics. Back with the passing of Roe v. Wade during this time, did you have the same kind of combative protesting?
You know what? I mean, that's really interesting. I never remember seeing anything like that at Michael Reese, whether it had been in any of the lobbies, whether it would have been outside. We never got any sort of negative reactions at that hospital. I don't remember any. So it's interesting now that you see it. And I'm wondering if maybe because it wasn't so well publicized at Michael Reese, although again, many women were able to find Michael Reese, so obviously their physicians knew, but I never saw any of that. Interesting though, because we see it now all the time.
Yeah, it's amazing who would
And
have
it's very
started that.
distressing.
Yes.
Pardon me?
I was like, who would have started that? I mean, Roe v. Wade passed. You guys were doing a great service, and it seems like now there's more protests than ever. So it'd be interesting to see who's the catalyst for that.
Yeah, first of all, it's nice to meet you. We had an email introduction earlier, and I'm hoping, I'd like to talk to you a lot about aid in dying as well. So maybe we can have a follow-up conversation. But you had asked about other hospitals, and my memory is that Cook County Hospital had a clinic that was then closed by Dunn back in the day.
Really?
Yeah, there was some sort of ban. I worked at county in my early days, and yeah, there was some issue that happened, and then it was restored. But at its peak, I think it did perform quite a few. I mean, you know, I remember when I worked in what they called the labor line in those days. And, you know, I mean, it was just a wild place. But that was a place where a lot of women went maybe they had Medicaid, maybe they didn't, to get abortions. So it was really tragic when that happened, the ban happened.
You know, we had a great director of OB-GYN, and I remember being in his office that day when he called me there, and he said we'd no longer be able to take Medicaid patients. Another interesting story, I've also served as staff attorney. I served as staff attorney at Resurrection Hospital, which is now Amita, and I worked on all the contracts. So obviously all the contracts at all the Catholic hospitals had Catholic directives that none of the physicians could provide abortions, give advice on abortions, or provide sterilizations. And I even got to know, and our CEO at Resurrection on Talcott, a lot of the CEOs for the Resurrection system and some of the other hospitals in Chicago were nuns who had MBAs. And I specifically remember having lunch. Our CEO wanted to talk to me about Passover, and she wanted to talk about Passover and Easter and how she and I had so much in common. And yet I realized, you know, I had this history that she was not aware of, and obviously I was not about to share it with her. But it's so weird when you're in, you know, when I think about it, here I was in this incredible environment at Michael Reese where so much great research was done. Our head of OB-GYN, our director, was doing great research with respect to IUDs, and he was working on what was called the progesticert. And then other physicians in the hospital were working on polio vaccines and working in all sorts of amazing areas dealing with insulin. We had amazing neurosurgeons. We had great orthopedists. We had amazing surgeons. So it was, I mean, we still talk about it when I get together. One of my friends was a social worker with me, and we mentored one another as well. I mean, we talked about our very personal experiences. It was, you know, and I don't think I've ever had an experience like that, and I'm so grateful that, and it really started me getting involved in many of the issues that I feel very strongly about now.
Mm-hmm. I see Helen has a question.
Oh, thank you. Well, first, Ila, thank you for the work that you've done. And I'm really happy to hear about the service that Michael Reese had. I'm a retired school nurse, and I never knew that a woman
Really?
could get an abortion at Michael Reese. I knew about the family clinic, and I remember, you know, sometimes helping students, you know, letting them use the phone so they could, you know, make arrangements. It was limited to the first 50 who applied for the week, as I recall. But I'm wondering, when you were working at Michael Reese, what was it like working with the nurses there? Were they all nurses who volunteered, who wanted to work in PTU?
They wanted to work on PTU. The name of the nurse, I don't know her full name, but her name was Huff, and she was an African-American nurse. And she was there as long as I was there. She worked not only on PTU, but she also worked with women who were getting second trimesters. Mm-hmm. I also worked with nurses in the labor rooms. I mean, you know, sometimes they would call me if a patient had a stillbirth. So, I mean, we were dealing with, you know, just a realm of different feelings and emotions depending upon what these women were going through. But the nurses and the doctors we worked with were incredibly supportive. And I will tell you, it was a very special time to be a social worker at Michael Reese. I mean, we not only did this, we did group counseling, I did family counseling, We did individual counseling. And interestingly enough, of all the women that I saw, I had one young woman who at the very end said she wanted to have the child. She did not go through with the abortion. And, you know, we were able to work with her and make sure that she got obviously the appropriate medical care that she needed. But we really respected where these women were and what they needed. It just worked. It worked well, but the nurses were amazing.
Yeah, good to hear.
Okay, I see Terry has a question.
Hi. As an aside, I used to work at Resurrection under Sister Donna Marie. Yeah. Yeah. So anyway, my question is, you said that when the Hyde Amendment started, obviously Medicaid wasn't available for those women. What happened to those women? Where did they go? Did they have their children, or did they go in the alley? I mean, do you have any idea?
You know, I have no idea. Again, if perhaps they went to Cook County, perhaps they may have had the children. It's a very good question, and I'm not sure. I mean, it was terrible. It upset us all, but I'm not sure of where they went. That's a good question. I mean, unless they went to Cook County, I can't think of any other. I don't know if Planned Parenthood at that time was providing abortions. It seemed like Planned Parenthood was referring their patients to us at Michael Reese.
Thank you.
So it was very unfortunate.
Yeah, I have a question. I'm wondering, the women that you helped, did you ever hear from them later, or caught up with them at all at a later date?
They sometimes sent me notes or letters. I don't know if they might have called. I might have gotten calls, and all the calls were and the letters, they were extremely grateful. And I talked to my girlfriend again about her experience because she had had the procedure at Michael Reese. Now, she was married at the time. She was using the Dalkin Shield, which was a very early form of IUD that failed a lot, and it failed with her, and she got pregnant. And she knew it was, you know, they had just married. Her husband was going for another degree, and it was not the right time for them to have a child. But she told me that the feeling that she had after the procedure was not so much one of guilt, but that she was very relieved by having the experience. The physician was very nice to her, and actually was a physician we all worked with. So it was interesting hearing it from her point of view. Now, I did have one woman who was Catholic who did ask me if I thought abortions were a form of murder. And I just kind of, not that I BS'd my way through it, but I tried to explain that this was a very personal decision that she was making, that I knew that it was very difficult, and that it was very difficult for all the women, but that we wanted to be supportive because we knew at that time it was the right thing for her. And I think that the women realized way deep down that if they had had a child, there could have been a lot more emotional and psychological ramifications if they went on to have a child that they knew they weren't ready to bring into the world. And sometimes we had a few women who also had genetic issues and the chances of having a child might have had a genetic type of injury, and they obviously wanted to avoid that as well.
Okay. I see Judith has a question.
Yes, more of a comment, kind of piggybacking on what you asked, Iris. So I'm a psychologist. I work with a lot of women who have experienced various kinds and degrees of trauma. And some of the women I've worked with, having an abortion does count as a trauma for them in their lives. But one of the mitigating factors that they tell me about often is the counseling they got at the time. So what the work you did and the other social workers did at the time was really, really important. And I'm hearing it 40 years later.
Wow.
So just wanted to let you know that.
You know, we knew it, we felt it. What amazes me is just how well run the unit was. It's interesting. My girlfriend said when she first went, they had actual beds that the patients used were lying in before they had the procedure. And then by the time I came on, they had, you know, chairs, leather chairs that were more comfortable. And she wasn't sure whether they had anything to eat. We always had a nice sandwich and a drink for the women because they had not eaten all day. So I feel that we did as much as we could. We provided them. It was a very nice room. It was a quiet room. Again, it was not on an obstetrical floor. So we did everything we could to make it as comfortable an experience for them as we could. Knowing, yes, that it is a very traumatic experience for them. And some women who were examined, sometimes they were a little too further along and could not go through a first trimester abortion, in which case we then had to work with them in terms of their obtaining, if they wanted, a second trimester abortion. Those were tough ones when the physicians could not perform the procedure safely in the first trimester.
Is that level of care still being done anywhere?
That's a good question. I mean, obviously, Michael Reese is no longer.
Mm-hmm.
I do know that Planned Parenthood is do have physicians who do perform the procedures. Now, I have never visited, and I probably should, now that I've given this talk, I should probably talk with Planned Parenthood and go to one of their clinics and see what their procedure is. But honestly, I don't know if there's anything, I mean, I don't know if Northwestern provides the services. I just don't know. It's a good question, though.
Does anybody know that's in this group? Have any ideas? No?
We need to do some research, huh?
Yeah, right. Yeah, that's a good point. Anybody else have any comments, questions? You can unmute yourself, and just if you can't figure out how to raise your hand, you can do it physically. But okay, it looks like Ed's got a question.
Yeah, I can't figure out how to raise my hand, but so Ila, say again, you started in what year did you start there? It was 74?
Yeah, so I literally had just gotten out of I literally graduated on a Friday and started working at Michael Reese on a Monday.
So did the women who come there, I mean, this was right after Roe v. Wade. Did they all understand and appreciate how radical this was, that they could finally, go to an up and up doctor and get their abortions?
I'm sure they knew that. I'm going to tell you a side story. When I started law school in about 1979, and in my first class, one of the first classes when we were kind of talking about advocacy, we had to get up before the class and we had to argue one side. So I was the first one called upon, and I was to pretend that I was the husband of a woman who was getting an abortion. And I had to advocate on his behalf. Perhaps that he did not want the woman to get the abortion. And she did, and he did not. And it kind of freaked me out a little bit. And afterwards, I told my professor what I had done before I went to law school. And I think he was really taken aback, but it was an interesting experience to go through. It was something I wasn't expecting. I think also at the very beginning, we may have been able to bring up some of the women, and if they had a spouse or boyfriend with them. I don't know how long that went for, but I think I remember doing that because it was important for us, if we could, to bring the family members or to bring the boyfriend so that they could talk about what their experiences were. Because the one thing we know in healthcare is that when it's impacting one person, it's impacting the entire family. And I remember I had one girlfriend who got pregnant and her husband told her that she had to have an abortion. I mean, he was dictating to her that she had to have an abortion. And she ultimately had it, but I think that, but for him, she might have gone on and had the child. So there were all sorts of feelings fomenting within these couples and families. And yes, it was a new time. It was a new time.
Okay, Debbie?
Yeah, I just have a quick comment. Yeah, I was a senior in college when Roe v. Wade passed. I knew a number of girls throughout college who had always gone to New York or to Mexico.
Wow.
And because that was the only alternatives then. And even after in 74, I don't think people knew about what you could do in Illinois. I went to the U of I. So they were still traveling to other states. They were not, I mean, I think it was a well-kept secret that Michael Reese was doing this, you know. And people didn't want to really stay close to home to have an abortion because they were usually doing it without parents' approval or knowledge. I mean, these were, you know, young women. And people were still traveling. Because I can remember on our dorm floors and then always having collections so they could
really
to go.
Well, when I was at Wisconsin, I had this crazy roommate. Let's see, so it was my sophomore year, and she got pregnant, and she had to be certified by a psychiatrist so that she could obtain an abortion either in Madison or in Milwaukee.
Yeah, it was a different time, let's just say. One thing is also, we had Heather Booth speak at one of our events, and she was the Jane Collective
at the University of Chicago.
Yes, she's quite the speaker. If you ever want to hear somebody who can really tell some stories, but
I would be fascinated.
The way Jane even started, it was really happenstance. She helped out one woman, and then and she called herself Jane, and then 2 days later someone else called the dorm and said, I'm looking for Jane, and it just sort of went from there. So she has a great story if you ever want to hear a good one.
Well, I did look it up because the women would call a phone. They would make the call, and then someone from Jane Project would call them back, and then they would be taken to one place and then another place to get the abortion. And after a while, some of the women actually perform the procedures themselves. I mean, even though that's obviously you don't have a physician doing it, but I'm sure they were very adept at it. But it's I'd be interested in hearing her experiences. And
Yeah.
there's a part of me that thinks that maybe a physician from Michael Reese might have worked in that underground. So I'd be interested in knowing if because it was Hyde Park, couldn't be
Right.
closer to Michael Reese.
Right. And she doesn't live in Chicago anymore, but her family does. So she comes back here a lot. If you're ever looking for a good speaker, she's really very good. She's very dynamic. So
Can you imagine? I mean, can you imagine? I mean, talk about the very beginning, and even knowing what could occur, that it was more important to help a woman obtain an abortion. That was like the most important thing to do, and that they were doing it even though a number of them were ultimately arrested, although I think just about the time when Roe v. Wade came down, you know, they were let go. But it's an amazing story to read about.
Yes, it is. So there's also a film. I can try to send you the link so you can see it.
Yeah, I think, weren't you talking to me about that, Iris, as well? About the film?
Was that the Two Janes? Or is that something different?
It might be. I'm not sure what it was called.
Okay.
I have to look it up. But I have it. I can send it to you guys, and you can.
Oh, great!
It's a great story. It's a great story.
I'd appreciate it.
Sure.
I was wondering. I know after this experience, you went into law school in health law. Were you influenced in doing that by your experience at Michael Reese?
Well, we were fortunate at Michael Reese. I mean, I was never interested in going to law school. I know my father always said, "Oh, Ila, you should go to law school." And I don't know, Dad, I'm not sure. I wasn't into, you know, he was always watching Perry Mason. so he always wanted me to go to law school. But we had in-house counsel at Michael Reese. And a lot of hospitals have in-house counsel, although a lot of hospitals now are so big and are merged that their legal counsel are usually located elsewhere. But we literally had our in-house counsel at Michael Reese Hospital. And between my working in a lot of OB-GYN issues that had some legal ramifications, I was in Peds Renal. We had a Jehovah's Witness. So I was always in Max's, his name is Max Brown, who's now retired, but I was always in Max's office. Or when we were in the intensive care unit, at that time, we didn't have advanced directives. So we were dealing with all sorts of death and dying issues. So I was often talking to our legal counsel, and occasionally he came down. I mean, he knew the head of the intensive care unit very well. He was very good friends with the director of social work. The director of social work, her name was Leona Grossman, and she's the one who made our department what it was. She had always told me to follow my dreams. I always wanted to move to California, but she knew I always wanted to move on in whatever I was doing. And I would say I got burned out a little bit in social work because of just so many of the issues I was dealing with, and decided, I mean, I went to night law school, which wasn't easy, but it was something I really wanted to do. And that's always stayed with me. I always enjoy, I mean, the only thing I've ever been interested is in the healthcare aspects. I mean, although I do a lot of contracts for physicians now, and it's interesting, but I'm always interested in hearing about their practices. And my closest friend is a CEO of a hospital system now in California. She started out at St. Joseph's. She was in infectious diseases. So she knew Anthony Fauci. She started the AIDS unit there. That was in the 1980s. So, you know, sometimes these things just come along at a time that you don't ask for it. But we took it and we went with it, and we were able to help so many people.
Anybody else have any questions, comments for Ila? Any raised hands?
Yes.
Actually, I have a question for Amy. So you were at Cook County Hospital and U of I Hospital emergency rooms in what years, and did women come in
God.
to get abortions?
I'm trying to remember what years. I think it was the late 70s, but I think it was early 80s, that period. I was at Cook County for, I think, maybe 4 years, and then U of I for a couple of years before I went to law school, actually.
Wow.
And,
Oh, you went to law school too.
yeah, I did. I started at county as a financial aid caseworker, trying to get green cards for people, and walking around the halls saying, hey, it costs $624 a day. Help us get money, and apply for Medicaid. And then I moved up to running the house staff program from the administrative side at the ER. And then I moved over to U of I, and I ran all the non-clinical operations in the ER. And then I decided to go to law school. And I went to Northwestern, and I was going to do health law like you. It's so interesting to me. And I ended up clerking, I won't say, it's in one of the big firms. And every question presented was, how can we cut our Medicaid days and, and still, get money, basically. That's pretty much it. I mean, it was just like, how can we cut our services and still get Medicaid dates? That's what the question was. And I just was like, I don't want to do this, so that led to many other things in my life. But I did, I've always had a real passion about health and the issues around health and women. And the experience of working in that labor line, the labor ward, was something I'm never going to forget in my whole life. And I was there during a period where they weren't doing abortions. I do recall that. And it was awful. One of the things that was offered to people who had multiple pregnancies, and these were often very young people, was for them to get sterilized, to get their tubes tied. And I remember, because I was very young at that time, going, wow, that seems so drastic. But, I could understand it, I felt like county really tried to do the best it could under very, very difficult circumstances. The doctors there were so committed and passionate and progressive, really, during the time I worked there. Really made a really profound impact on me. I was being involved in the committee to save Cook County and all of that stuff. It was pretty interesting times. But I have a question for you, actually. What did you learn from all of this? I mean, that helps you today. What lessons can we get from all of this in terms of the right to have an abortion?
I think of, my passion when I think of when I worked with women who needed abortions, or when I think of individuals who want aid in dying. I think it's just that individuals, that we have to really respect who they are and what they want, and to assist them in any way we can, that it's so personal to them, and that they have a right to make these decisions. I feel that we have a right to make the decision in terms of when and how we want to die, if and when we're faced with that. I feel very strongly about that. And to do as much as we can in our own way, whether it's donating funds or donating our time. It was an experience that you learn this stuff and you don't even know you're learning it when you're doing it. And it has that amazing impact on you.
Yep.
And I'm so grateful that I had that experience. But I think I mean, my first year of training in social work, I worked at Children's Memorial and I worked with kids. And then my second year, I was working at Rush. Rush had just opened its first inpatient alcoholism unit for men.
Okay.
And I was an intern there. I mean, I did my second year training there, and I didn't even drink. So, I mean, I don't even drink. So, I mean, meeting the men there, meeting some of the husbands who said, "Don't you dare tell my wife what I told you," or "Don't you dare do this," or "Don't you dare do that," or we had group therapy. And I remember when I told them that I was leaving, I remember one of the individuals there, he wrote me a letter and asked me if he could see me by myself before I left. I mean, so, you know, wherever you go, or just a patient at Michael Reese, you know, please, you're not going to forget me, are you? So I think we have these amazing experiences, and you know, I'm grateful that I met all of these people. That, let's put it this way, that they had as much an impact on me as I did on them.
Yeah. You know, my mom used to say that my time at County and U of I really was my postgraduate education. And I think she was right. And I look back on all of that. I think a big part working with people who have no means and are, you know, I remember just even trying to get green cards for people.
Yeah.
And, you know, they were supposed to come up with all this documentation. I mean, they had no transportation. They had to work. I mean, it was just craziness. And just because I'm a very stubborn kind of person, I just would be like, I'm going to stick it to the man and I'm going to get these cards, you know, and that attitude was helpful. But I think what you said about the compassion is even more important, recognizing the dignity of these people who have such a tough time in life, and you know, just being kind and respectful. I think it's just so important. So really appreciate what you're saying, and you know what you said about the aid and dying too. I don't know if you know, I'm the regional campaign manager for Compassion and Choices for the Midwest region here. So I'm working with Ed and others here on trying to get medical aid and dying authorized in Illinois. So there's a lot of work to be done, you know, on this.
Yeah. You know, there was another thing at Michael Reese too. We had a very active women's board, and some of the women who delivered babies had nothing at home. We had layettes for them. We gave them layettes. We gave them receiving blankets. We gave them Enfamil for their baby because they had nothing. They had nothing. And our women's board was amazing. And when we took our kids who were on dialysis up to Camp Shy, and we took them up 1 year for a weekend, the second year for a whole week with the equipment, they funded the entire trip for the children, for the staff. We had to get a bus. We had to get trucks to bring the equipment up. Our dietitian talked to the dietitian at Camp Shy because the food had to be kosher, but it also had to be low sodium and low potassium. I mean, it was amazing what we were able to do. And here you had these incredibly philanthropic men and women who assisted Michael Reese and the journeys that we were going on. I mean, we spoke before them. I think they were very appreciative of what we did, and they were very giving.
Well, I think talking about compassion, it just seems to me that right now is a time for a surge in compassion with the coronavirus and people out of work and people short on food and short of money, and people who are abused by family members, policemen, whatever. It just seems like a time for compassion now. And unless anyone has any more questions or comments, we're going to move on.
Supreme Court sits in Washington. Everyone a mother's son. reside in noble ease. None of them ever suffers pregnancy, though they hand out decisions such as these. Back alley abortions for the poor. Yes, back alley surgery, a knife solution. Why hanger abortions for the poor? Back alley surgery, a knife solution. Why hanger abortions for the poor? Well-to-do people can manage well. Anything they need, they can buy and sell. But the teenage drifter can walk in hell or roll on the backroom floor. And the battered children who bruise and bleed, the mother with too many kids to feed. Pro-life offers them in their need back alley abortions for the poor. Yes, back alley surgery, a knife solution. Why hanger abortions for the poor? Back alley surgery, a knife solution. Why hanger abortions for the poor?